These 5 facts explain why Venezuela could be on the brink of collapse. The situation in Venezuela is going from bad to worse. This week, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro repeated his threat to seize closed factories and nationalize them, a bold move considering his popularity numbers are in the tank and the opposition, which won legislative elections late last year, is breathing down his neck. These 5 facts explain what you need to know about Venezuela right now. When we last checked in with Venezuela, the country was already being crippled by shortages. The situation has deteriorated further. Water is now rationed by the government, and some residents have been warned that water will be supplied just once every 21 days after the mainland reservoir dries up. Venezuelans have begun stealing water from swimming pools and tanker trucks to get by. Electricity is limited too, with Maduro ordering public offices open just 2 days a week in a bid to conserve energy. This is in addition to the 4-hour power cuts ordered across the country and the rolling blackouts that have become a part of daily life. Basic medicines like aspirin are nowhere to be found, and supermarket shelves are often empty. In April, another devastating blow: the country's largest private company, Empresas Polar S.A., closed its doors. Empresas makes 80% of all beer consumed in the country, a tough turn of events at a time when Venezuelans could use a drink. New banknotes begin circulating as inflation soars into triple digits. Venezuela. Crisis hit. Venezuela introduces 3 new banknotes in response to hyperinflation. As Hemingway would say, Venezuela went bankrupt gradually, then suddenly. For years, the country has been deeply dependent on its vast oil reserves, which account for 96% of export earnings and nearly half its federal budget. That was manageable when oil was selling at more than $100 a barrel. Venezuela has budgeted for oil at $40 per barrel for years now, but instead of saving the surplus when prices were higher, much of this emergency oil fund was either spent or stolen. Venezuela would now need oil prices to reach $121 per barrel to balance its budget. Instead, they're hovering around $50. Damage to Venezuela's economy has been exacerbated by drought. About 65% of the country's electricity is generated by a single hydroelectric dam that's now in serious trouble. For decades, corruption has been a constant in Venezuelan politics. It's the most corrupt country in the Americas, and 9th most corrupt in the world, according to Transparency International. Its murder rate of 90 per 100,000 residents is the second highest in the world, after El Salvador. Not surprisingly, people are angry. There are an average of 17 demonstrations per day across the country, according to the Venezuelan Observatory for Social Conflict. The current unemployment rate is 17%, and the IMF projects it will reach nearly 21% next year. The inflation rate is expected to hit 481% by year's end and 1,642% by next year, according to the IMF. To put that in perspective, in February a McDonald's Happy Meal in Caracas cost $146 at the official exchange rate of 6.3 bolivars per dollar. Legislative elections this past December handed control of Venezuela's parliament to the Democratic Unity Coalition, a political grouping of centrist, center-left, and center-right parties. It was the first time in 17 years that Chavismo, the unique brand of socialist and populist politics spearheaded by the late President Hugo Chavez and continued by Maduro, his chosen successor, failed to win nationwide elections. Maduro's approval rating in December was 22%, today it's 15%. Some 70% of Venezuelans want him removed from office. Populists need popular support, and Maduro's is running out. To that end, the opposition has collected enough signatures to trigger a recall referendum against Maduro. Activists needed 200,000 signatures, 1% of all voters, to kickstart the process. They got 1.85 million. 2 weeks ago they submitted their list to the National Electoral Council, CNE, for approval, but the validators are government loyalists and have been dragging their feet. Why? Timing of the referendum is crucial. According to the Venezuelan constitution, if the president is ousted within the final 2 years of his term, the presidency passes to the sitting vice president, in this case, Aristobulo Isturiz, a loyal Chavista. If that should come to pass, January 10, 2017 is the magic date. The opposition fear is that the Chavista movement will simply sacrifice Maduro to protect Chavismo. And short of a popular uprising intense enough to force the government to move more quickly, that's exactly what will happen. Maduro looks likely to be ousted before his term officially ends. The real question is whether Chavismo will get the boot along with him. Venezuela is suffering the worst economic crisis in its history. Ordinary people in the oil-rich country are regularly going without food. Three-quarter empty supermarkets are being ransacked by angry, hungry mobs. The government has declared a state of emergency, food is now being transported under armed guard, and basic necessities are being rationed. People have to queue for hours and sometimes overnight on their assigned days to receive staples like rice and cooking oil. By IMF figures, it has the world's worst negative growth rate, -8%, and the worst inflation rate, 482%. The unemployment rate is 17% but is expected to climb to near 30% in the coming few years. The shadow of hunger, the desperation of the crowds and the spread of unrest and criminality threaten the government of Nicolas Maduro, 3 years after he was bequeathed power by the dying revolutionary strongman, Hugo Chavez. The opposition has launched a drive to canvass signatures for a petition for him to step down. That will be a difficult task in the face of a state-run electoral system determined to thwart it, but the state may implode even if the recall referendum fails. The Maduro government has blamed the crisis on the U.S. and right-wing business owners who it accuses of cutting production to sabotage the economy, but Maduro has inherited a ruinous state-run system from Chavez to which economists say he has added some damaging mistakes of his own. Chavez built his popularity on oil money and foreign debt, using both to fund consumption, while nationalizing more than 1,200 private companies deemed not to be functioning in the public interest. But in 2015 the oil price was cut in half and Venezuela's reckless public finances helped make it a high-risk debtor, cutting the country's access to international capital. The Maduro government has responded to the consequent hole in public finances by printing money, fueling inflation. It's estimated that the cost of basic groceries that would keep a family going through a week increased by more than 25% between March and April, and now costs 22 times the state minimum salary. The state has tried to ration basic foodstuffs and set their prices, but the consequence is they have simply disappeared from the shops into the black market. The opposition says the direct distribution of food has been politicized by being channeled through local committees run by Maduro's United Socialist Party of Venezuela. According to Transparency International, Venezuela is the 9th most corrupt country in the world. Members of Maduro's family and immediate entourage have been implicated in drug smuggling and hundreds of billions of dollars are believed to have been siphoned out of the economy. The crisis is likely to get even worse in the near future. The government has been running through the country's gold reserves to pay its international debt service and finance at least some basic imports, but those reserves are now dwindling, and Maduro will either have to default or stop importing food. Both options are potentially catastrophic.